I'm Emily Granger, and last year I paid a $7,000 restaurant bill that my parents secretly dumped on me during what was supposed to be my birthday dinner. But the revenge, it was worth every cent. 2 months later, I stood in court and handed my mother a manila folder of texts, receipts, and messages that proved her lies, and watched her face fall as the judge ruled against them. That folder cost me $20. The justice, priceless. Before I start, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I want to know where my story's traveling. Now let's go back to the night everything began. It was a Friday evening in early spring, and I had rented the private dining room at Vesuvio's, an upscale Italian bistro just outside Seattle, to celebrate my 33rd birthday. Not a big, flashy bash, just family. My parents, my sister Ashley, and a few cousins. I'd called ahead to request soft jazz and enough space for 12. The candles flickered low, warm light dancing across the white tablecloths. Waiters weaved between tables with practiced elegance, setting down drinks and passing out menus with practiced smiles. I took a sip of my Bellini, catching my reflection in the antique mirror behind the bar. I looked calm, collected, happy even. Inside, I was already bracing for something. To Emily, Ashley chimed brightly, lifting her glass. Happy birthday to the best sister/event planner in the world. I laughed softly and raised my glass in return. To family, thank you for coming. That's when it happened. My father leaned forward, arms crossed on the table, and said loudly, like he was announcing a football score, "We didn't bring gifts, we're broke." The words landed like a slap across my face. The entire table went still. The cousins exchanged quick glances. A waiter passing nearby slowed, then moved along discreetly as if sensing incoming disaster. My mother looked down at her wine. Ashley's face twitched into a sympathetic grimace. I swallowed hard, forced my lips into a polite smile, and replied, "I invited you for time, not gifts." My voice didn't crack, not even a little. I even laughed, just a bit. The kind of laugh that tastes like copper. My father grunted something unintelligible and went back to browsing the menu like he hadn't just torched the mood in front of 10 people. Mom mumbled, "We wanted to be here, that's the important thing," without looking at me. "Of course," I replied smoothly, my eyes on the waiter who had just returned, trying to subtly rearrange the seating for more people than I'd originally booked. "Looks like someone added guests." "Oh, right," my mom said, waving a hand like it was no big deal. I might have told a few more folks. More the merrier, right? I pressed my napkin tighter into my lap. A few more people. I turned toward the front of the restaurant, and there they were. A steady stream of relatives I hadn't spoken to in months. My dad's cousin Lisa, her husband, their 2 adult kids, even my mom's church friend from Bible study. The hostess approached and asked me softly if we'd need more seats. I glanced at my parents. Neither one met my gaze. "Please," I said. "Make space for everyone." The evening was off to a perfect start, if by perfect you mean already ruined. But I wasn't going to lose control, not yet. I smiled, greeted my uninvited guests like I had invited them, and made a mental note of every silent offense. Not to store for bitterness, but for later use. I knew something was coming, I just didn't know how expensive it would be. But I would learn. Oh, I would learn. By the time the antipasto was cleared, and the pasta courses began to arrive, the dining room at Vesuvio's had nearly doubled in noise. Laughter bounced off the dark-paneled walls, forks clinked against china, and voices overlapped in a confusing, chaotic symphony of small talk and family gossip. And I was still trying to wrap my head around how the guest list had grown from 12 to nearly 30. It started with my dad's cousin Lisa sliding into a chair beside Ashley and planting a red lipstick kiss on my cheek. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. Can't believe it's been a year already. Last time I saw you, you were still dating that, what was his name, Mark Mitch?" "Matt," I corrected gently. She snapped her fingers. "That's right, the moody one, he was a trauma nurse." But sure, moody worked too. Before I could respond, Uncle Darrell was pulling up another chair. "This seat taken. Thought I'd surprise you, Em. Your mom said we'd better show up or risk being blacklisted from family functions." I blinked. "Did she?" Darrell laughed like it was a joke. Maybe to him it was. I scanned the room, a slow dread creeping up my spine as more and more faces filled the space, faces I hadn't seen since someone's funeral 2 years ago. Aunts, uncles, cousins twice removed. A group of teenagers at the far table I barely recognized as someone's kids. Even a woman from my mother's Pilates group who'd once told me I smiled too confidently for a single woman. The waiter approached me again, awkwardly holding a leather-bound reservation ledger. "Miss Granger, I just want to confirm, you'd originally booked for 12, correct?" "Yes." I kept my voice low, controlled. He gave a polite nod and then added, "We've now seated 28, and there are 5 more waiting at the hostess stand. Should I bring out the folding tables from the back?" Of course there were 5 more. I felt the smile on my face straining, stretching into something artificial. My mother appeared beside me like smoke. "They made it," she said brightly, reaching for a breadstick. "Isn't it lovely? I told everyone you wouldn't mind." I turned to her, my voice low. "You told everyone," she shrugged, swirling her wine. "What's a birthday without the whole family? Besides, you were already covering the room, right? Might as well enjoy the crowd." "Mom," I whispered through a tight smile, "we barely talk to half these people. They're still family." Her tone sharpened like that ended the discussion. I looked at her carefully. She wore her best pearls, the ones she usually reserved for church banquets. Her makeup was flawless. She'd brought her best self tonight, not for me but for the show. I smiled slowly. "I'm happy they came." It was a lie, a practiced, gracious lie, and it worked. "Oh good," she said, relaxing. "I knew you'd be touched." Touched wasn't the word. More like stung. Used, overrun. I watched as Ashley posed with 2 cousins for a picture in front of the Vesuvio's wine rack, holding up a glass like she was the guest of honor. Meanwhile, my dad chuckled at the other end of the table with Uncle Daryl, both of them already on their second round of Chianti. "I didn't even know half of these people were still in town," I murmured, mostly to myself. Beside me, my cousin Lee slid into the seat vacated by Lisa and grinned. "Is wild, I thought this was supposed to be a small thing." "It was," I said. She winced. "Yikes, well I'm glad I came. You look gorgeous, by the way." Lee had always been one of the kind ones, thoughtful, real. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small, square box wrapped in pale gold paper. I blinked. "Oh Lee, you didn't have to." "Shush," she said, placing it into my hand. "It's nothing fancy, just a little something I thought you'd like." For a moment my throat tightened. A simple gift. Thoughtfully chosen. Amid this bizarre sea of people using my celebration for free wine and ambience, it felt like an anchor. "Thank you," I said softly. From across the room, my mother caught my eye and raised her glass with a radiant smile. "See," she called out. "Isn't this just perfect, Emily?" I nodded, my lips barely moving. Perfect. It was the word she always used when things were far from it, when she was glossing over real problems with forced laughter and charm, when she wanted applause without earning it. And suddenly I understood, this wasn't about me, it was never about me. This dinner, this surprise, it was about them, their image, their control, their ability to rally a room and make themselves look like the ultimate loving family. And I was the bait, but the truly terrifying part, no one else seemed to notice. They were all laughing, eating, toasting. Everyone but me. I turned back to my plate, my grip on the fork tightening. If this was just the beginning. What else had they planned? A small ceramic box, a dog-eared book of poetry, a candle that smelled like pine and clove. The gifts arrived slowly, subtly, passed across the table between bites of gnocchi and sips of wine. One by one, my uninvited guests placed them in front of me with sheepish grins or warm pats on the shoulder, as if their presence had always been part of the plan. I kept smiling, nodding, thanking, always thanking. From my cousin Marla, a framed photo of us at a family picnic when we were kids, sunburned and giggling, grape juice mustaches under crooked sunglasses. "Oh my God, where did you find this?" I asked, genuinely startled. Marla chuckled, brushing her bangs behind her ear. "I came across it cleaning out my mom's garage. Figured it might make you laugh or cringe." "It's perfect," I said, my voice softening. And it was. From Aunt Deborah came a little stack of journals tied with twine. "You're always writing lists or sketching ideas on napkins," she said. These felt more durable. From someone's teenage daughter, Anna, I remembered eventually, a small print of a sunflower she'd painted in acrylics. "I didn't know what to get," she mumbled. "But you're always really nice at reunions. Like you don't treat me like a kid." My chest ached in the oddest way. None of this erased what my parents had done, of course. It didn't make the ambush okay. Cracked something open, a reminder that not everyone in this room had come for free wine and a reason to dress up. Some had come because they'd wanted to, and some had brought pieces of themselves. Across the table, Lee gave me a knowing smile. You good? She mouthed. I nodded and she leaned in to whisper, this turned out better than it had any right to, huh? That pulled a laugh from me, a real one. You're not wrong, I said. She squeezed my arm and added gently, thanks for having us, Em, really. I opened my mouth to remind her I hadn't invited anyone but stopped myself. What would it even accomplish now? Instead, I just smiled again. You're welcome, I said. The clinking of silverware resumed around us. A waiter refilled wine glasses. Someone passed around a dessert menu even though we hadn't gotten to the entrees yet. And for a brief, shining moment, the room almost felt like mine again. Almost. Ashley tapped her glass with a fork and raised her eyebrows. Hey. Let's go around and share our favorite Emily moment. A chorus of oohs and yes do it filled the air. I froze, my polite mask tightening. This kind of thing always made me feel like I was watching myself from the outside. The curated, polished version of me, the one my family loved to display but never really knew. I'll start, Ashley said brightly. Remember when Emily used to dress up like Nancy Drew and interrogate us over who ate the last cookie? You were 6 and terrifying. Laughter rippled through the room. Still terrifying, someone added, and a few people chuckled. I smiled, though the memory was laced with something sadder for me, how I'd learned early to ask questions no one wanted answered. More stories followed, each one a little fuzzy with nostalgia, some sweet, some mildly embarrassing, but none unkind. And for every chuckle, every shared look, I nodded along, held my posture, refused to let my discomfort show. This wasn't the gathering I had planned. It wasn't even mine in the truest sense. But somehow I was still the host, the anchor, and I would act like it. Because if nothing else, I'd learned how to survive a family performance with grace. Even when the script had been rewritten without my consent. Even when the spotlight burned. The room was humming like a beehive. Voices layered over clinking glass and clattering forks. Laughter rising every few seconds like waves that never quite reached me. I smiled on cue, responded when addressed, nodded at stories I couldn't track. My face was warm from wine, or maybe just the strain of performing. That's when I saw her. Rachel, framed by the entrance to the private room, holding a modest bouquet of lilacs wrapped in brown paper and a small gift bag that read, "To the woman who made 13-year-old me believe in time travel." I blinked, almost certain I was imagining her. She hadn't RSVP'd. I hadn't even sent her an invite, because after high school, Rachel had moved to Portland and stayed there. We talked occasionally, shared birthday texts and funny Instagram reels. But in person, not since Dad's hernia surgery 3 years ago. But there she was now, brushing her curls behind one ear, scanning the room like she was looking for safety. Then her eyes found mine. "Excuse me," I murmured to the group near me, rising so quickly my chair screeched. Rachel's face broke into a grin. "I crashing." I laughed, actually laughed, and threw my arms around her. "You have no idea how needed this was," I whispered into her shoulder. She pulled back and held up the flowers. "Lilacs, you used to pick them off Mrs. Kavanaugh's bush and swear they were yours. That woman hated me. She hated everyone, but I brought a peace offering and," she wiggled the little gift bag, "something else." I stepped aside, guiding her into the room like she was royalty. "Rachel, everyone, this is Rachel Ambrose. My oldest friend, and possibly the only person here who isn't secretly judging my choice of wine." A few polite chuckles echoed around us, but most of the guests were too deep in their own conversations to notice. That was fine. I didn't care. Not right now. Rachel leaned close again. "You look like you're surviving a family ambush." "Because I am." "On your birthday." I nodded toward my mother, who was clinking her glass again for attention. Apparently, surprise now means triple the guest list, make Emily pay and pretend it's love. Rachel arched one eyebrow. "Oh honey, they're lucky I didn't arrive earlier. I would have announced a fake engagement just to short-circuit your mom." That made me burst out laughing, loud enough that Ashley turned from her seat and blinked at us. Rachel set down the flowers at my place setting. "Don't worry, I'll keep it low-key, blend into the chaos. But first, open this." She handed me the gift bag. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a hardcover copy of The Secret Garden, our favorite book from middle school. The exact 1996 edition we used to read under the bleachers during gym class. "You remembered," I breathed, flipping open the cover. She'd inscribed it, "For when you need a secret place of your own again." "Happy birthday, Em." My throat burned. I didn't speak. I just reached for her hand and squeezed it. For the first time that night, I felt grounded. Not just appreciated, but seen. Rachel didn't have to be here. She didn't have a family obligation. She hadn't come for wine or to be photographed next to the restaurant's fancy wine cellar. She came for me. We slipped into a corner of the room, just the two of us, as dinner plates were swapped for second helpings and the dessert trays began to be discussed. Rachel listened as I gave her a condensed version of the night, starting with my dad's declaration of bankruptcy by birthday and ending with the 30-plus guests I hadn't invited. When I got to the part about my mom saying more the merrier, Rachel rolled her eyes so hard I thought she'd pull something. They used your name, your event, and your bank card. That's not a party. That's identity theft with hors d'oeuvres. I choked on my wine. Don't worry, she said, brushing a napkin across my arm like a dramatic stage partner. I'm here now. You're no longer alone on the island of dysfunctional expectations. And just like that, I breathed for the first time in hours. Rachel didn't fix the night. She didn't have to. She simply reminded me who I was beneath the performance, the politeness, the exhausting grace. Just Emily. Still standing. Dessert at Vesuvio's was always a production, but this one felt theatrical. Not elegant, not refined, performative. The lights dimmed slightly as the waitstaff emerged from the kitchen in a slow procession. At the front of the line, a towering tiramisu cake, rimmed in chocolate curls and topped with golden candles that sputtered and sparked dramatically. And behind it, clapping with enthusiasm she hadn't shown once for my career milestones, was my mother. "Oh, everyone look," she called out, as if narrating for a crowd at a theme park. "Here comes our birthday girl's masterpiece." A wave of applause rolled through the room. Phones rose. Flashlights flicked on. Voices joined in off-key, off-timing, and way too loud. "Happy birthday to you." I stood, folding my napkin with deliberate care before letting Rachel gently nudge me toward the center. 30 people, most of whom hadn't spoken to me since 2020, half of whom didn't bring a card, let alone a gift. And yet here they were, singing like it was the crowning moment of a heartfelt surprise party. I smiled. For the camera. For the social media posts I knew would surface within the hour. For the optics. My hands pressed lightly to the back of the chair in front of me. My posture was perfect. Chin tilted just enough to show off the silver pendant Ashley had given me 5 years ago and never let me forget. I made my face match the moment. But inside, I was studying everything. Like a director, watching a final dress rehearsal. Noting the shifts, the tones. Who was genuinely celebrating and who was simply orbiting the center of attention. "Make a wish," Ashley sang, snapping 3 pictures as I leaned forward. I did. I wished for clarity, for dignity, for enough strength to stop pretending this was okay. The room erupted in cheers as I blew out the candles. Then came the clinking of glasses, and the real performance began. My mother rose, holding her champagne flute like it was an Oscar acceptance speech. "I just want to say," she began with a warm chuckle that had been perfected over decades of PTA meetings and fundraisers, "Emily always knows how to throw a perfect party." A smattering of here rose from the far end of the table. "She's our detail girl," Mom continued, her eyes glittering with pride. "Ever since she was a kid, always planning, organizing, making things just right. Honestly, we didn't even have to do anything. She handled it all. From the invites to the wine." My smile didn't falter, but something inside me shifted. The subtle framing, "we didn't bring gifts, we're broke," to "we didn't do anything, but look how well it turned out." It wasn't gratitude. It was manipulation wrapped in praise. Because if I always knew how to throw a perfect party, then I couldn't possibly be upset, right? If I had handled it all, then their complete disregard for boundaries wasn't overreach. It was helping me shine. Rachel caught my eye from across the table, her brow slightly raised. She saw it too. I lifted my glass, joining the toast with grace I didn't feel. "Thanks, Mom," I said, voice smooth. "And thank you everyone for being here, it means a lot." It didn't, not really. But I had to keep playing the role, just a little longer. The cake was served, plates passed. Guests took selfies with me like I was a celebrity meet and greet, then returned to their wine and whispers. I sat back down as Rachel slid a piece of cake in front of me. "Chocolate-laced diplomacy," she said under her breath. "Eat slowly, you're going to need the calories for whatever comes next." I laughed quietly, but my fingers tightened around the fork. Something was coming, I could feel it. This party was still shifting under my feet. And the spotlight, still aimed squarely at me. The sugar high from the cake was starting to wear off. Plates were scraped clean, Wine glasses refilled one final time, and jackets began to appear over chair backs. The kind of slow shuffle that meant people were starting to think about the valet line, weekend errands, and Sunday church plans. I leaned back, trying to match the relaxed posture of a satisfied hostess, but my eyes were scanning the room like a security camera. And then, like clockwork, he appeared. A waiter, young and clearly new, approached my end of the table with the kind of careful smile that only came with uncomfortable tasks. In his hand was a small black folder. "Ms. Granger?" he asked softly. I nodded. He handed it to me discreetly, low and angled to block any curious glances from nearby guests. "Here's the check, as requested." I hesitated a full second before taking it, then opened it. $7,023.18. I blinked once. Twice. A numb buzzing filled my ears. Wine, appetizers, extra plates, additional seating charges, dessert upgrade, premium cake request, and 33 in trays. I stared at the number again just to be sure I hadn't hallucinated the comma. Nope. $7,000. It felt like someone had dropped a boulder onto my chest. The restaurant, with all its warmth and candlelight and laughter, suddenly felt suffocating. I couldn't hear the music anymore. I couldn't even taste the last bite of tiramisu lingering on my tongue. My mother, 5 seats down, was now laughing brightly at something Ashley had said, gesturing animatedly with her champagne flute like a woman who hadn't just engineered financial sabotage. I stood up slowly, clutching the check folder like it might explode if I dropped it. "Excuse me," I murmured, barely audible. "I just need a minute." Rachel, already watching me like a hawk, stood too. "You okay?" I nodded too fast. "Totally fine, I gestured vaguely toward the hallway. "One sec." I made my way past the dining room doors into the short corridor that led to the restrooms and emergency exit. It was quiet here, muffled. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking as I typed. "Rachel, emergency. Can you bring cash ASAP?" 3 dots appeared almost instantly. "How much?" My throat tightened. I didn't want to put this on her. But I also knew I didn't have that much in my checking account, and I knew full well that no one at the table was planning to help. I typed back, "As much as you can, I'll explain later." Then I inhaled, fixed my face in the mirror hanging above the hallway console, smoothed my dress, reapplied my lipstick with surgeon-level precision. When I returned to the table, the waiter had already returned and placed 2 pens and the itemized receipt next to my untouched plate. A few guests glanced at it with vague interest, then went back to their conversations. No one said a word, not my dad, not my mom, not Ashley. I eased back into my seat, folding the check and slipping it into my clutch. I smiled as Lee leaned in and asked, "You okay?" "Just needed a breather," I said lightly. "All good." She nodded and returned to her husband's conversation. Meanwhile, my heart thundered in my chest like a war drum. They'd done it. They had invited half the family, ordered what they wanted, basked in attention, and left the bill sitting neatly in front of me. $7,000. And not a single person had asked, "Do you need help covering this?" Not even pretended. I reached for my wine, took a slow, measured sip. Then I smiled again, because the game had changed. I wasn't just going to survive this dinner. I was going to make sure every single person who treated my kindness like a blank check remembered this night. And not for the cake. I hadn't even fully sat down when my mother's voice rang across the table like a bell in a quiet church. "Darling," she cooed, swirling the last inch of champagne in her glass, "cash or card?" A few nearby heads turned. Some curious, some amused. A woman at the next table, mid-sip of espresso, raised one eyebrow over her demi-tasse cup. The whole thing felt rehearsed. Her tone wasn't casual, it was loud enough to signal something. To put me on display. The dutiful daughter. The generous one. The one who foots the bill with a smile because she can. I smiled back, slowly. Then I set my wine down with quiet precision and looked her square in the eye. "Actually," I said, my voice even, "I'd like to split the check." It was like dropping a crystal vase on a marble floor. Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't come naturally in a crowded restaurant. Even the clatter of forks and the hum of background chatter seemed to shrink, like the room was listening. My mother blinked. "What?" "I think it makes sense," I continued, still calm, still smooth. "I'll cover the guests I invited. If everyone else could chip in for themselves, we can settle the rest." My father let out a short, confused grunt, glancing toward the check I'd tucked neatly into my purse. "Split it how?" "Well, for starters," I said, "I didn't invite 30 people. I folded my hands in front of me. Just 12, so I'll cover those. A couple of cousins froze mid-bite. Ashley looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. The weight of the statement hovered in the air like smoke. Emily, Mom laughed lightly, flicking her hair back with forced grace. Sweetheart, this isn't a potluck. You don't split a birthday dinner. Her laugh didn't reach her eyes. I didn't plan a banquet, I replied gently. I planned a quiet dinner. You expanded it. I'm just asking for balance. Someone coughed. The waiter returned with a tray of espresso cups and looked around, clearly sensing the frost. Shall I place these here? Yes, my mother snapped, then immediately plastered on a smile. Thank you, dear. Ashley leaned toward me, her voice sharp and low. What are you doing? Being fair, I said simply. Ashley's lips parted like she wanted to argue, but she hesitated. Across the table, Rachel was very still, watching, absorbing. I didn't look at her. I was too focused on the slow, stunned ripple spreading through the group. Whispers started near the far end, soft and uncertain. A few people looked toward the check, then toward me, then toward my parents. Wait, someone said finally. Are we not all covered? No, I said plainly. You weren't, and it's okay, but I do think it's fair we each contribute. My father scoffed, muttering something under his breath. My mother, face still frozen in a smile, looked as though she might snap the stem of her glass. That's not how family does things, she said through clenched teeth. I tilted my head. No. That's how this family has always done things, but not anymore. It was a small shift, one line, one sentence that sat like a quiet earthquake beneath the tablecloth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply stated a truth aloud and for once without apology. The room wasn't just quiet, it was tense. But beneath the tension, there was something else. A flicker of recognition in the eyes of a few cousins. A shift in posture. A silent agreement, unspoken but heard. I sat back and took a sip of my coffee. Still smiling, still in control. They didn't realize it yet, but I had just taken the first brick out of the wall they'd built around me. And once it started to crumble, they'd have no idea how to stop it. Just as the awkward murmurs around the table began to stir into quiet confusion, I caught a flicker of movement by the entrance. Rachel, my lifeline in heels, was making her way toward me with a sleek black envelope in hand, her expression unreadable. I stood as she reached the table. She didn't smile, didn't greet anyone, just slipped the envelope into my palm like we were making a silent trade. Small bills, she murmured, as much as I could pull. Thank you, I whispered. She gave my shoulder a squeeze, then took her seat without a word. The waiter returned at that moment, hovering with the kind of careful posture reserved for moments you don't want to be a part of. He cleared his throat gently. I apologize for the interruption, but per your earlier request to split the bill, I've itemized the charges by groupings. My mother's face darkened. That won't be necessary. It's fine, I interrupted calmly. Let's hear it. The waiter nodded, glancing down at the notepad in his hand. We have $1,000 worth of food and beverages linked to the original 12-person reservation. Presumably your invited guests, he explained, eyes flicking toward me with a hint of sympathy. The remaining balance, which comes to roughly $6,000, is attributed to the additional guests, brought by your parents and sister. A hush fell so fast, I swear even the espresso machine in the kitchen paused. My body went cold. 6,000, I repeated slowly. For yourselves. No one moved. My father grunted, barely glancing up from his coffee. We assumed you'd cover it, it's your birthday. Something in my chest cracked. A silent, brittle fracture I knew couldn't be unseen or ignored anymore. I never offered to pay for 30 people, I said, quietly but clearly. I didn't even know they were coming. My mother set her glass down too forcefully, the clink ringing sharper than she intended. Oh, come now, you make good money, it's one dinner. I stared at her. It's not the dinner, it's the assumption, it's the entitlement. It's the fact that you used my name to throw a party you never paid for, never even asked about, and handed me the bill. Ashley finally looked up, arms crossed. You always make things dramatic. You're ruining the night over a number on a receipt. No, I said, standing now, voice steady, hands still at my sides. I'm calling out what's been happening for years. Tonight just happened to have a dollar sign attached. The table was dead silent. A few cousins shifted awkwardly. Someone dropped a spoon. I don't mind generosity, I added, but I mind being exploited, and I mind being expected to smile through it because it makes things easier for you. Rachel's voice was soft but firm. You don't need to explain yourself. I know, I said, still staring directly at my parents. But I am. My father leaned back, suddenly looking very tired. You're being unreasonable. And you're being selfish, I replied without blinking. This wasn't kindness, it was control. All eyes were on us now. I saw it in Lee's expression, something between apology and admiration. In the way Cousin Aaron looked down at his plate, no longer chewing. In the tension curling around every wine glass on that table. They knew. Even if they hadn't before, they knew now. The evidence was right there on the bill. And the damage, it was already done. I opened the envelope Rachel had given me and pulled out the cash, neatly counted and folded. To the waiter, I said, handing him the amount for the portion I had actually planned. This covers the guests I invited, with tip. He looked stunned but nodded. Of course, I'll update the receipt. My mother's face flushed, but she stayed silent. Ashley looked at her phone, suddenly fascinated by it. I remained standing, because everything was different now and I was no longer playing along. I stood taller than I felt. My knees were tight, my pulse a silent roar but my voice steady. I'll pay the $1,000, I said calmly, eyes on the waiter. For the people I invited. The rest, those who came without a gift or invitation, can pay for their own indulgences. The word indulgences landed like a sharp note in a quiet room. Not cruel, not dramatic, just accurate. There was a beat of silence, then whispers. A few heads turned toward my mother. Others turned toward each other. Some shifted in their chairs, blinking like they had just woken up to what the evening actually was. From the far end of the table, Uncle Ron, who had ordered the $88 osso buco and 2 bottles of wine, slowly lowered his fork. My cousin Lee looked over at me, her mouth opening slightly in awe. Then she sat back and nodded. A quiet, proud nod. She's right, she murmured to no one in particular. Rachel was the first to rise. She didn't say anything, just slid her chair back and looped her bag over her shoulder like the evening was done and that was that. And somehow, that gave the others permission. Honestly, Aunt Deborah said, clearing her throat and folding her napkin, I didn't realize this wasn't prearranged. Happy to cover ours. She nudged her husband, who blinked and then gave a quiet nod. One by one, cousins and uncles and in-laws began murmuring agreements. Someone pulled out their phone to open a payment app. Another reached into a wallet. The staff began collecting dishes with a little more speed, sensing the mood had shifted beyond repair. My mother sat still, lips pursed so tightly I could see the white line forming around them. My father looked down, jaw clenched. Ashley was still scrolling through her phone, pretending not to notice anything. But her ears were red, always the giveaway when she was caught in something. I turned to the guests nearest to me, those I had originally invited. Thank you, I said softly, meaning every word. For being here, for your kindness, for your gifts and your warmth. It meant more than you know. Lee stood and gave me a long, warm hug. That was badass, she whispered into my ear. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Rachel stepped beside me, her hand grazing my back in a quiet show of support. Want me to walk you out? I nodded. We gathered our things, gift bags, the bouquet, the copy of The Secret Garden. I took one final glance at the table, where some people were pulling out wallets, others whispering to each other, and my mother still sat like a stone queen in a kingdom she no longer controlled. No theatrics. No tears. No final dramatic lines. Just a quiet, dignified exit. I walked out surrounded by the people who mattered, those who came not to consume but to connect. And with every step toward the front door of Vesuvio's, I felt something uncoil inside me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about no longer financing their fantasy. I paid my part, and I left them with the truth. We were 3 steps from the front doors of Vesuvio's when her voice cut through the air like a jagged knife. You ungrateful brat, I stopped. Not because I was surprised, but because even now, some part of me had hoped she wouldn't make a scene. That maybe, just this once, she'd let go of the illusion she controlled the narrative. I turned around slowly. My mother was standing now, shaking slightly, her wine glass still clutched in one hand, the stem trembling between her fingers. Her eyes locked onto mine, wild with disbelief, anger, and something deeper, panic. I carried you for 9 months, she shouted. And this is how you thank me, public humiliation on your birthday. There it was. The mask gone. Behind her, my father shoved his napkin down onto his plate. You're causing a scene, he muttered, though it wasn't clear if he meant me or her. Ashley leaned away from the table, dramatically whispering to someone beside her. This is so embarrassing, she always does this. My mother was still glaring. Do you even hear yourself, Emily? You're walking out on your own family. No, I said, voice firm. I'm walking out on your manipulation. That's very different. The room didn't erupt. It didn't have to. The guests had already made up their minds. Lee was the first to stand beside me. She didn't say a word, just placed a hand gently on my shoulder and faced my mother with quiet strength. Then came Uncle Ron and Aunt Deborah. Then two cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. One by one, chairs scraped against the wood floor as they stood, not for me, not against her, but for what was right. Rachel whispered in my ear, "Keep walking." But I took one more second. Because this wasn't just about walking away. It was about naming what they'd done. You didn't throw me a birthday dinner, I said, loud enough to be heard but calm as ever. You threw yourselves a party and sent me the invoice. You turned my celebration into your spectacle, and when I wouldn't pay for it, literally and emotionally, you called it betrayal. My mother's mouth opened, but nothing came out. I nodded. I'm done pretending that love means debt. I'm not your savings account, and I'm not your scapegoat. You lost the right to call it family when you made it transactional. Silence fell again, but it was different this time. This wasn't the hush of shock, it was the stillness of recognition. And as if to punctuate it, Lee leaned close and whispered, "That was badass." I smiled without showing my teeth. Just a small upward turn that said, "I meant every word." Then, without waiting for a reply, I turned back toward the doors. Rachel opened one for me, and just like that, we left. I didn't glance back. I didn't need to. The air outside hit my skin like a baptism. Cold, clean, and honest. We walked into the night with our coats clutched in our arms, our heels clicking against the pavement like punctuation marks. Freedom didn't always roar. Sometimes it just stepped. And it took the truth with it. The next morning, the sun came through my blinds with an almost mocking warmth. I lay there for a few minutes, eyes open, waiting for the weight of shame to hit me. It never did. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. I had finally said the things I'd swallowed for years. Not in a whisper, not behind closed doors, out loud, but I didn't realize just how far the echoes would carry. By noon, I was sitting outside a corner cafe, sipping a lukewarm oat milk latte when Lee slid into the seat across from me, hair still damp from the shower. "Okay," she said, pulling off her sunglasses, "you broke the family group chat." I blinked. "Wait, what?" Lee pulled out her phone and opened the thread, tilting it toward me. "Mom and Dad are blowing it up. Nonstop texts, voice notes, even a screenshot of your bill with some dramatic caption about ingratitude. But," she grinned, "nobody's siding with them." I took the phone and scrolled. One cousin had written, "If throwing a surprise party means sending someone a $6,000 invoice, count me out next year." Another, "Y'all used her to pay for your image. That's not parenting. That's manipulation." And then my stomach twisted, but in the best way, one message from Aunt Brenda, my mother's older sister. "I've watched Emily get steamrolled for years while being told she's lucky to have such a generous family. Last night wasn't an outburst, it was a boundary, and about time." My hands trembled slightly as I handed the phone back to Lee. "She really said that?" Lee nodded. "She called me after, said she wanted you to know she's proud of you. Said you reminded her of herself when she finally stood up to your mom." That hit harder than I expected. But the peace didn't last long. By the time I got home, I had 12 missed calls from my father and 4 voice messages from my mother. The last one was only 10 seconds long and chillingly quiet. "You'll regret humiliating us like this. Don't forget we made you." A week later, an envelope arrived by certified mail. They were suing me for emotional damages caused by defamatory public humiliation and financial abandonment. I sat there in my living room, envelope dangling in my hand like a rotten fish, trying to process the absurdity. Rachel was the first to say what I couldn't. "They're not trying to win," she said. "They're trying to punish you, make you crawl back to stop the embarrassment." But I didn't crawl. Instead, I hired a lawyer. And I called Aunt Brenda. She didn't hesitate. "I've been waiting 20 years for a chance to speak the truth in front of a judge," she said, her voice firm. "Count me in." The court date was short-lived. Barely a half-day hearing in a plain beige room that smelled like toner and disappointment. My parents showed up looking theatrical, my mom in pearls and a veil of self-righteousness, my dad in a stiff suit he hadn't worn since my college graduation. They spoke first, rambling about family tradition, public shame, how I'd embarrassed them in front of their community. And then Brenda took the stand. "I watched them take from Emily for years," she said, voice clear. Her time, her money, her spirit. Last week wasn't a tantrum, it was self-preservation, and I'm proud of her for finally saying no. It was over in less than an hour, case dismissed. But more than that, they were fined for filing a baseless claim. Judge looked at them over the rim of her glasses and said, "You don't get to exploit someone's love, then punish them when they stop letting you." As we walked out of the courthouse, Aunt Brenda linked her arm through mine. "Now everyone knows the truth, honey," she said. "You stood up and they crumbled." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. They couldn't control the narrative anymore because I had finally written my own. When the courthouse doors closed behind me, the air outside felt unfamiliar. Lighter, real. It wasn't the dramatic movie-style freedom I always imagined justice would feel like. There were no trumpets, no applause, just a long, deep breath and the sharp sound of heels against concrete, mine, Aunt Brenda's, and my attorney's. But inside, something had shifted permanently. I didn't owe them anything anymore. Not money, not silence, not the endless emotional editing I'd done for decades. Aunt Brenda walked beside me, calm as ever, her hand wrapped gently around my forearm. "You know," she said, eyes forward, "I always hoped one of us would finally draw the line. I just didn't expect it to be you. Not because you weren't strong, but because you were always so good." I smiled at that, bitter and sweet all at once. I thought being good meant keeping the peace. "No," she said, squeezing my arm. "Being good means knowing when enough is enough and walking out without burning yourself to ashes." My lawyer peeled off to make some calls, leaving just us two in the parking lot. She paused before unlocking her car and turned to face me fully. "They'll keep talking," she warned. "You know that, but the difference now, people will hear it and know exactly who they're listening to." That landed. Because for years I had twisted myself into whatever shape they needed, so they could keep their image, their narrative, their control. Now I didn't need to twist anymore. I thanked her, hugged her tight, and promised to call her later. And as I walked to my car, bouquet of wildflowers still in hand, sent by a cousin who messaged, "Sorry it took me this long to see it." I felt something close to peace. The next few days passed quietly. No more calls from my parents, no apologies, just silence. A silence I chose not to fill. I stayed busy. I cleaned my apartment, rearranged my bookshelves, started journaling again. Rachel came over with a bottle of wine and a box of dumplings, kicked off her shoes, and said, "So, you won?" "I didn't want to win," I said honestly. "I just wanted to stop bleeding from places no one could see." Rachel nodded, tapping her chopsticks against her plate. "And you did." We ate in comfortable silence. Real silence, not the kind you fill with pretending or eggshells, but the kind that settles into your bones like safety. Later that evening, a message popped up in the group chat, one of the few I hadn't left. "Lee, some of us are getting together this weekend." Not a party, not a statement. Just people who actually see Emily for who she is. "You're all welcome, but come real or don't come at all." I didn't reply right away. Just stared at the screen for a long time, letting those words wash over me. People who see me. Not as a walking wallet, not as a dutiful daughter, not as a character in someone else's family playbook. Just me. That night before bed, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. No makeup. No practiced expression. Just tired eyes and a calm heart. I whispered, "You don't have to perform anymore." And for the first time in my life, I believed myself. A year later, the only thing that came in the mail on my birthday was a single card, handwritten, no return address. Just a sketch of a bird breaking out of a cage on the front and the words inside, "You didn't break the family, you broke the cycle." No signature, but I didn't need one. That evening, the backyard twinkled with string lights I'd strung up myself, lopsided, imperfect, and entirely mine. Folding tables with mismatched chairs formed a long, uneven line through the garden. Flowers from the farmer's market overflowed in thrifted vases. Wind rustled the linen napkins, and someone's dog snored under the dessert table. This chaos, this comfort, was everything last year's dinner wasn't. Lee was already dancing barefoot near the grill, holding a sparkler like a 5-year-old. Rachel was in charge of music, her playlist jumping from Stevie Wonder to Billie Eilish with zero explanation. Aunt Brenda was carving lemon bars with a plastic knife and telling a story none of us could keep up with, which only made it funnier. No one was filming, no one was posing, and no one asked who was covering the bill because there wasn't one. Everyone brought something. Everyone belonged. When it got darker, we moved to the fire pit. Laughter blended with cicadas and clinking glasses. I sat curled in a blanket, my feet tucked beneath me, surrounded by people who had chosen to be here, not for optics, not out of obligation, but because they cared. Rachel passed me a cupcake funfetti, homemade, slightly lopsided. There was one candle sticking out of the center, already burning crookedly. No speech, I said, laughing. I promised myself no birthday monologue this year. Lee raised an eyebrow. Liar, I grinned, then stood slowly, holding up my glass peach tea with a splash of something stronger. This, I said softly, is what family looks like now. People who show up because they love, not because they expect. They didn't clap, they didn't cheer, they toasted. Quietly, sincerely. Eyes on me, hearts open. And I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time, safe. The night drifted on. Stories were shared, games played, someone started a group karaoke of an old Destiny's Child song. Brenda dozed off under a quilt halfway through dessert. At one point, Rachel leaned over and whispered, "Do you miss them?" It wasn't accusatory, just curious. I thought for a second, staring into the fire. I miss who I used to hope they'd become. She nodded. That's fair. But I don't miss pretending, I added. And I don't miss paying for love with silence. She clinked her glass against mine gently. That part of you, the one who stayed quiet for so long, she finally got to leave the party early. I smiled. Because that part of me had. And the one who stayed, she was finally home. If this story moved you, give it a like and share it with someone who needs to remember they have the right to walk away.